feel this is the right place to be talking in London actually about this new book, Soul Story, because I was here a little while back talking about this other book, which I just heard tonight is in their bestsellers, which is kind of nice, which is Deep Awake. And that's a book about awakening, which is what I've spent most of my life exploring and taking people into the awakened state. But I'm not going to talk about that tonight, so if you want that, you'll have to see something else. I'm going to talk about this, which is my new book, Soul Story, which is something I've been working on for, the last 58 years. I've written 35 books. This is by far the most important. I'm going to do my best to try and explain to you why I think it's the most important. And you can tell me at the end how successful I am. It's a book which is full of ideas. I can say that without exaggeration, that there's a big idea on every page. So knowing what to share with you is a puzzle. And knowing how to describe it to you in a way that can easily make it inviting. So because I'm in Watkins' bookshop, I think I'm going to say it like this. One way of understanding what I've set out to do with Soul Story is to reinvent esoteric philosophy. Having been a student of esoteric philosophy in all of its forms for all of my adult life, I've become convinced that it's inadequate to the needs of the 21st century. The people who created it lived in a different time and didn't know what we now know. And the problem with that is that the new knowledge, which we associate with scientific inquiry, has overtaken esoteric philosophy, so that it's become kept alive in little oases like this, whilst in mainstream society it has really died. Because it's not up to the job of bringing what are, to me, really important insights about the nature of reality, which arise from an exploration of spirituality and states of awakened consciousness. It can't harmonize those or bring them into harmony with this new knowledge. And when it does, or when it attempts to, it often pays a very high price. I find it fascinating that there's a lot of people exploring evolution and spirituality right now, but one of my frustrations is that none of them address things which are absolutely central to spirituality, like death. If you're willing to give up on very key ideas like immortality of the soul, then you can make these two things the same, but you've sacrificed what spirituality is actually about. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm not going to tell you why I'm going to tell you the story. I'm just going to tell you it, and I'm going to do it in very broad strokes. And then you can see whether it whets your appetite to look deeper. I'm going to take the scientific story of evolution, which is immensely powerful, I think. It's our great modern myth. It's on a scale of human achievement we've never seen anything like it. It's a way of looking at the creation and evolution of the whole universe. And I want to see it in a different way. And that story begins 13.8 billion years ago with an event that gets called the Big Bang, which is a really bad name because it wasn't big, it was very, very small, and there was no bang because there were no sound waves. So what happened 13.8 billion years ago was that time started. Time is very central to the story I want to tell. That's because my philosophical method is to look at reality as it presents itself to me. And when I look at reality as it presents itself to me, what I see is time. What I see is experience, which is changing all the time. That's what I'm seeing. That's what's always there. Time. A lot of spiritual people, a lot of scientists say things like time is an illusion, but the more I've meditated on that, I really have no idea what that means anymore. Because actually all experience would be impossible if it were not for time. Time is what reality is. So 13.8 billion years ago, time started. But I would like to look at time in a different way. We have an analogy about time, and sometimes we don't even notice the analogies we use. We say that time passes. I'm not sure it's a very good analogy, and I'd like to suggest a better analogy, which is that time accumulates. There is more past now than there was when I started giving this presentation. There's more past now than when you were born. There's more past now than when the solar system was created. There's more past now than when the Big Bang happened. 13.8 billion years have passed. So time, it seems to me, accumulates. And what I want to suggest is that the past hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't. It's here, implicit in this moment. This moment contains implicitly everything that has gone before. And if it didn't, it wouldn't be this moment. Implicit in this moment is me being invited to talk and accepting, you deciding to come, me learning to speak, you learning to speak, the evolution of the human body, the creation of the solar system, the Big Bang. Everything that has ever happened is implicit in this moment. If that were not true, history would be impossible. Justice would be impossible. Arguing over who left the lid off the toothpaste would be impossible. What has happened has happened. We can understand it in different ways, but what has come into form has come into form. It's happened. So I would like to suggest that 13.8 billion years ago, time started to accumulate. And it's been accumulating ever since. And through that process of accumulation, it has evolved. The time stream, which we're witnessing right now, has evolved. Where does it come from? Well, that's hard to say, but surely we can say this, that the universe has arisen from the potential for the universe. Wherever this has come from, it was the potential for all of this. The potential for time, the potential for matter, the potential for life, the potential for a Tim Freke and a you in this moment. The potential for language. Everything that could be is arising from the potentiality for everything that could be. So 13.8 billion years ago, this primal potentiality began realizing itself, and time began to flow. And in that process, it evolved, and that process of evolving was a process of individuation, so that the time stream began to coalesce into individual, distinct time streams. So that we found hydrogen and helium as individual forms arising. But everything as a time stream. Everything is a time stream. We look like things, but we're not things really, we're processes. Everything is a process, isn't it? Everything. If you had a time-lapse camera, you'd see that really clearly. Everything that exists, which we think of as a thing, is a process. And everything is individuated from this primal source, becoming distinct, related to the whole, but distinct. And in that process of individuation, we see the realization of something very fundamental to the nature of reality, which is subjectivity and objectivity. And what I mean by that is every individual time stream has its own relationship with the whole, which is its subjectivity. And the whole is the objectivity. I want to just play in this moment and then before we go back to the story. When you look at the world, one of the things which physics has shown us in creating this epic story is the world you're experiencing now, this is not objective reality. This colour, this, none of that is objective reality. What you are experiencing now is your experience of objective reality. Your experience. If you were a snail, you would experience it very differently. If you were a bat, you would experience it very differently. Physics today has got us to the point where for 100 years or more, we've known that this solidity is not there. This is our perception of something which is not there. Increasingly, physicists draw on metaphors like holograms, two-dimensional realities that appear as three dimensions. Computer programs, as an analogy, something which is actually digital appearing as three-dimensional, like a virtual reality. The term that works best for me from physics is that what you are experiencing is information. And you are reading this information, which is what is beyond your experience, to create your experience. This experience you're having and I'm having is a human experience based on objective information. That's where we've come to. So right now, there are two things that I've got here. There's the information, and there's my experience of it. So it seems to be that every time stream has that quality. Every time stream is objectively information being read. Here's my information, you're reading it as a guy in a shirt. A slug would read it very differently. Same information. So every time stream is information being read by other time streams. And every time stream is subjectively it reading of the information. You're doing it right now. Subjectively you read the information, objectively you are information. Seems to me that that's what time is. So that what happens 13.8 billion years ago is that process started and it's been individuating and evolving, so that as time has accumulated, objectively the information has become more and more complex. So we've gone from, well, the first 300,000 years, 300 million years with just the creation of atoms. It took that long for atoms. And then the chemicals, and then the galaxies, and that. But there's also a constant evolution of a subjective side to that too. That even an atom is discriminating the information around it. It's discriminating information as electrical charges. By the time it's become a particular chemical, oxygen for instance, everything is both discriminating the world around it subjectively and objectively giving off information to be discriminated by other time streams. And there's one other element which exists in here which is important. And that's the individuation is also a process I call unividuation, which means it jumps to whole new levels all the time. A good example is what I've just mentioned, water. At some point, hydrogen and oxygen, two completely separate things, at some moment in history, for the very first time, they came together and there was water. A whole new level of reality appeared. And that process has been happening over and over again. Here I am, a complex combination of cells. One day, for the very first time, two independent cells combined for the very first time to form a multicellular organism. They unified into something greater. So here we have a picture, I think, of what is commonly called an emergent universe. New things come into existence which have never existed before, all the time. So if there was a time when there was pretty much nothing but hydrogen, and now we've got all of this. New things come into existence, and that has gone through, it seems to me, three big phases. The first big phase is the creation of matter. The creation of the chemical universe, the creation of the solar system, of the galaxies, the creation of our solar system. And that's a huge amount of time taken for that information to coalesce. And then something extraordinary happened. There was a massive jump, and we see the beginning of life. A different level, a new emergent property. And with the existence of life, we see a whole new lot of new things coming into existence, leading to the ability for life to sense the universe. Sensation, the beginning of the first eye, the first ear. When that happens, the emergence of colour for the very first time. For instance, I love it. If you watch the Discovery Channel, you can see the early, early planet Earth, full of there's no animals, but plants and trees. And none of that's real. There was no green, because there were no eyes. There was information that could be read as green, but there was no green. The universe had not discovered green yet. It would have to wait until there were eyes before it would discover green. And then there was green. There were no rainbows. It would need eyes before there were rainbows. And then there were rainbows. Through this epic story, unbelievable new things have constantly come into existence. Through these two early phases of the evolution of matter, and then the evolution of all of the diversity of life. Thus far, although I've given it a different take and talked about time in a different way, I think most scientists would probably be happy enough with what I have to say. Now I want to move into new territory, because it seems to me that there is a third phase which mainstream science completely misses. And that is the evolution of matter and then life has led to a new development, which is the emergence of the most incredible of all things, the emergence of soul. And I'm using the word in the way that the ancients used the word, to describe something obvious. The ancient Greek word was psyche, psyche, psyche. It means soul. What does it refer to? Something very, very, very obvious. It refers to the experience you are having right now of a dimension of reality which is not made of matter and does not exist in space. And you live most of your life in it, actually. It's the dimension of existence in which you're understanding the meaning of these words. In the sensual level, the life level, the body level, there's a body making funny noises. Look. That's what's happening in sensation. There's a guy making sounds. But you're not experiencing just that, are you? You're experiencing meaning. But there's absolutely no meaning in the funny sounds. None. There is no meaning in the world. You will not find meaning in any sensation. All of the meaning exists in your psyche, or your soul, or your mind, or your imagination. And these are all names for the same reality which you are experiencing right now. They just come from different linguistic roots. What has happened through this incredible process of evolution is this other dimension has emerged, which transcends the physical world. And you're in it right now. It's where you are you. So what I want to suggest, and I'm jumping straight into the deep end with you here, folks. What I want to suggest is that the evolutionary story is not just the one that science has been telling, which is the evolution of the universe. Amazing, that is amazing. The evolution of life, even more amazing. And then a funny byproduct called the mind. What I'm suggesting is, no. it has led to the arising of the most extraordinary thing, a dimension of reality which transcends this, which we experience. And which, if you have, as I have done with my life, spent your attention looking at it, it turns out to be as big and as vast as our universe. Now, not very long ago, human beings thought our universe was the Earth and a canopy of stars, which were holes in the canopy. Then we discovered, oh my God, no, there's a huge galaxy full of 100 billion stars. It's massive. And then we discovered there's 100 billion galaxies. it's massive, massively beyond. I think it's the same with soul. We think it's this tiny little thing, which is our thoughts. It's not. It's a huge dimension. And you can go and explore it. And it's arisen from this one. And with the arising of soul, which you are experiencing right now, has, I want to suggest, come all the qualities of life explored by spirituality. Such as meaning, which we've discussed, magic, which we might go on to discuss, story, the fact that your life is a story, the fact that it's an adventure, that it has, meaning to you and purpose, all of that. None of that existed before there was soul. But now it does. And it's not just some weird byproduct, it's the whole point. It's where the whole thing has been going. And importantly for me, immortality. So what I'm asking science to do in this new story is to consider the possibility that there's more to evolution than just physics and biology. There's another level of evolution, which is soul evolution. And what I'm asking esoteric philosophy to do, spirituality to do, is consider that the soul and the qualities of the soul and the soul dimension is not something which has eternally existed, that we've fallen from with some mistake, or that we got cast out by God, or we got sucked into an illusion, or some awful thing, which is generally what those philosophies say. But that actually everything has evolved. Everything. Everything is the primal potentiality realizing itself on deeper and deeper levels. So it starts with the simplest, and from that more and more emergent and deeper levels emerge, until now we're in this really deep level, which is soul, where we have meaning. And I want to suggest that at each phase, that evolution itself has evolved. People associate in science the idea of evolution with natural selection, genetic mutation and natural selection, biology. And some version of that, well, it's obviously controversial, but some version of that does seem to be pretty powerful to explain the evolution of species. But the process of evolution that created the galaxies and the periodic table didn't happen through genetics. There was no genetics. The idea of genetics and natural selection applies only to the biological sphere. Physical evolution, which came before that, worked in a completely different way. But it became natural selection. Now, natural selection is a particularly good way of developing species, which are strong and resilient and diversified, where each one finds its place, lots of diversity. It's done brilliantly, just look. Individuals, they can come and go. In fact, the more they come and go, death's a jolly, for development of species, death's fantastic. Clears the ground, allows in the new, brilliant. And that's what reality has done, as it's realized deeper and deeper potentials. But I describe this process as one of individuation, that becoming more and more individual. What happens when we reach soul is a quantum jump in that individuality. And what I want to suggest is that when we reach soul, the purpose is not the development of species. It's the evolution of individuals. And when you come across the evolution of an individual, death is really not good, not helpful. Because all your individuality, all this huge process you've been through for the decades of your life, nothing, gone. What I'm suggesting is that doesn't happen. And that's one of the central insights which has been in esoterica from the beginning, because that's what people have experienced. The soul, right now, is information, objectively. It's subjectively experience of imagination, and it's objectively information on a non-material level. Have a look. On the biological level, your information and experience on a biological level. Yeah, here's my information, and I'm an experience of sensation. But here, in soul, the information is non-material and can't die. The soul has already reached a level where that doesn't happen. And I want to say that this is what fuels the ancient tradition that people have described across the world forever, which gets called metempsychosis or reincarnation. Which can sound like a woo-woo, crazy idea to modern ears. But part of what I want to do is suggest that there is an intellectually robust way of understanding this as not woo-woo. That the immortality of the soul and the journey of soul evolution through transmigration is not woo-woo. Because everything is information, and it's information on a non-material level. Now, I'm going to just throw at you a very simple analogy, because I haven't got time to go into all of the arguments which I present in the book. But it can help get what I'm saying. When I wrote this book, I wrote it on my computer in my office. But everything that I was writing was actually going straight to the cloud, which wasn't in my office. It was everywhere. It existed on a completely different level to my office. So if I dropped my coffee on my computer, it would look like I just lost the whole thing. But I wouldn't have lost the whole thing, because that information existed outside of the computer. I was working on it, my computer. I needed the computer to work on it. But it didn't exist in the computer. It did, and it didn't. Which meant that if I had destroyed the computer, I could have got another computer and started work on it all over again. Well, it's a really easy and sweet way of getting what I mean by the immortality of the soul and metempsychosis. Information moving about from different levels. The accumulated past moving about from different levels. So what I'm suggesting is everything is made of the past. The universe is made of the past. You are made of your past. Right now, everything you have ever been is meeting everything I've ever been. That's what's happening. And this moment is the coexistence of the past and the possible. That primal potentiality isn't just back there, it's right here. It's the potentiality for everything, which is why this moment is both everything that's ever happened and completely new. You've never ever had two moments the same, have you? Isn't that amazing? You haven't. You can't. You can never, it can't happen. Every moment will be the realization of a new possibility. So that this process, 13.8 billion years, has been the constant realization of deeper and deeper and deeper potentialities, which has led to the evolution of matter, and then the evolution of life and sensation, and then the evolution of imagination. And then a level of information, the soul, which is what you are, primarily, what we are. It's what we really exist, that's the level we exist on. Most of our action is taking place there. Which can survive the death of the body, like my computer information can survive the death of the computer. And so what I'm saying is that we can enter into this soul dimension, and we do now in dreams, all the time. We're in it now, it's where all the meaning is, but after death, we can really go into it. Now, one of the things which I found fascinating is whenever I hear people's near-death experiences, or even this, when I've studied and written books on things that people have said about death in the past, always sounds like a dream. Sounds really like a dream. And I want to suggest that's because that's what it is. Now, of course, it gets dismissed as, it's just a dream. It's just imagination. I want to agree with that, just take away the word just. It's imagination! It's reality on a level of images. Here, this is where we've got, this exists separate from me. as information. But in my imagination, it's an image. And that I can exist in a world made up of images which I have collected from the sensual world. And that we can go into a collective dream together. So that heaven has evolved. Because everything's evolved. The after-death state has come into existence as a deep potentiality. And if you study the history of what people have said about life after death, you'll see it coming into existence. It starts as a land of shades. It's kind of not very formed. It then turns into an idealized projection of people's lives, the drinking halls of Valhalla, the happy hunting grounds. Then as the religions take off, you find these splendid worlds with angels and archangels and thousands of Buddhas. And now with people in near-death experiences, these vast cities and panoramas and gardens and anything you can imagine. People arriving, meeting people you've met before, but they can be anything you can imagine them to be, or they can present themselves in different forms, a bit like a virtual reality. What's your avatar going to be? You can change it. You're still connecting. You're still connecting with someone. It's just the form it takes is in the imagination. And you can exist in that for a while, and then you need to go back into another process. And we can discuss why that happens. It's a common thing which is happening through the whole of life. The body's doing that. The body is arising on this incredible level of life for a while, and then it will have to go back to its chemical components. The soul arises up to this level of imagination, and then it will have to come back to the body. And when we talk about reincarnation, it can, if you think about it in traditional terms, like there's the soul, which is some spooky thing that gets in the body of a baby, and it all sounds a bit nuts. But if you say, look, objectively, this is information. Information which is then doing this. Like your phone and a Bluetooth device. Just go, ooh. Now we're like this. So now what you do to one, you do to the other. When you let them go, they're separate. But once they're like this, they stay like a symbiotic relationship. I call it a psychosymbiotic relationship for a while, which is what we're in right now. A psychosymbiotic relationship for a while. So what I'm suggesting is the very form of evolution has moved on. So that what started as physical evolution became natural selection, became the transmigration of soul, which allowed this increased form of individuality to emerge. Where's this going? Is that it? I don't think that is it. My sense is the deepest things are arriving last, all the time. For us too, in human evolution. Human evolution didn't start with universal compassion, longing for justice, treating others as equals. It started with pirating your neighbours, stealing all their goods and raping all their women. That's where it started. It's only recently that these deep things, compassion, justice, these have emerged. They're still only just taking form, but they've taken form over the last period of human history. The deep things arrive last because they need the more superficial things to build on. That's when they can arise. So, I want to suggest that the deepest thing that is arising right now is awakening, spiritual awakening. Still very small, but it's been growing. You look back in history, like 1, 2, 1, it's like a guy in cave. Now, it's much more accessible to us. Much more accessible, because we're moving forward together. What is that? I started off with this primal potentiality, over here on my left, which has been woo. One of the words that philosophers have often given to that primal potentiality is spirit. It just means essence or being. Spirit. Let's use the word spirit because it's a traditional word and we're in Watkins. When we wake up, what happens is we see our essential being. And our essential being is the place where everything has arisen from. I am a body, or I have one, and I'm experiencing that as sensation. I am a soul, and I experience that as imagination. But before all of those, there's my being, the thing which is doing the experiencing. And the great teaching of spirituality is that your deepest being has no form. This is what I talked about last time if you were here. It has no form because it's the thing which is looking, so it has no colour. It's the thing which is listening, so it makes no noise. That deepest being, which is your deepest being, is the primal spirit. That's what we all are. That's what everything is. The primal spirit is the experiencer of every time stream, from the most primitive to the most evolved. And when we awaken, we see this deeper level of who we are, the place where we're not just an individual, an individuated current, we're actually the source of the whole thing. And when we awaken to spirit, we call it a spiritual awakening. And it's accompanied by this recognition of oneness and this immense love, which embraces the whole within it. So I think what's happening right now, which is new, is that having gone through this adventure of becoming matter, and then becoming life, and then exploring soul, that through particular soul streams, spirit is being conscious of itself and recognizing its nature. So the overall pattern of this story for me goes right back to Gnostic mythology that I was writing about 20 years ago, which is a journey from unconscious oneness of potentiality through increasingly conscious separateness of individuality to conscious oneness. Unconscious oneness through conscious separateness to conscious oneness, which is when we recognize that the root of everything is one thing. So that through you and me, that deep potentiality can know what it is. Okay, so here's my last big idea for you, and my favourite. So it comes at the end, which is good. I want to talk about God. It's a difficult word. I'm going to use it because I want to reclaim it a bit. I often talk about spirit or transcendent being, but I'm going to use the word God because it's cheeky. But I'm not going to talk about God as you may have been used to it. Religion has failed us. With the advance of science, it's failed us. Why? Because it puts God at the beginning of time. There is this being, we don't know where he's come from, it's usually a him. He's sitting there at the beginning and he creates the universe. Okay. Maybe it's a big mind. Who knows? There's some problems with it. There's one traditional problem which theologians have been wrestling with for centuries, which is traditionally called the problem of evil, which is if God is this all-powerful, all-good being, what the hell's he doing allowing all this suffering? And there's lots of clever answers and none of them work. What is he doing allowing a universe in which everything eats everything else? Horribly. Just where little babies die of AIDS and what's that about? Why would you do that if you were all powerful? So that's the problem of evil. The other problem with God is that we now know there were 180 million years of dinosaurs, which is what I call the problem of absurdity. If there was a God at the beginning of time and he was like, let's create soul, what was that about? Does that make any sense? 180 million years of dinosaurs? So my personal conclusion is if there's a God at the beginning, he's completely mad and he's a cunt. And I don't want anything to do with him. He's bonkers. To the conclusion the Gnostics came to 2,000 years ago. I want to suggest it's because we've put this presence in the wrong place. Throughout my life, since I was very young, I've experienced a being of love. You may have too. It's the most real thing I've ever experienced. It holds me, it guides me, it supports me. I can feel it now. Total goodness, total love. Not that guy at the beginning. I don't want to suggest it's because that transcendent being of love is not at the beginning of time, it's at the end. It's where everything's going. It's the realization of the deepest potential. And the deepest potential is conscious oneness. The deepest potential, and conscious oneness is another word for love. The deepest potential arises last, not first. It isn't there all-powerful, allowing all the evil. It's arising from all of that struggle. And when you and I awaken, we play a part in it coming into existence, so that we are the vehicle through which God is being born. In the after-death state, people describe and encounter the being of light, which is also a being of love, which is described as God or your own deepest self, which is the same thing. And a lot of traditions, especially in the East, they have this idea that life is a mistake. They have this idea that we've become lost in something, that we're confused, and if only we could get back home from where we should be, it will all be all right. What I'm suggesting is that's totally wrong, that life is not a mistake. It's an epic journey towards greater and greater beauty, in which we are participants. And that when we encounter the love light, the ideal is not, as has been said in the past, to dissolve into it like a drop into the ocean. Because although that sounds good, if you stop and think about it, what it says is that your life is worth nothing. It'd be better if it didn't happen. It's ended, hurrah, just go back to the one, finished. My own intuition is no. My own intuition is that your individuality is everything. Is the whole point. Because the more individual you become, which means the more past you accumulate, the more you become, the more conscious you will be. So that you can become conscious enough to be conscious of being conscious. You can be conscious enough to spiritually awaken. And when you do, you will be spirit knowing that it's one. So that when you enter that light, it's not about dissolving, it's about how long can you hang in there without dissolving. Because when you dissolve, you'll be back in the unconscious oneness. And then you'll find yourself back here. But just like it's the same if you go into deep meditation, you'll know. How long can you stay in that formless presence of bliss without going, How long can you stay alert and awake and present in that beauty? Because you have become so individual that you can hold that in the vast oneness. When I was developing these ideas, I was giving a talk about something completely different. And a woman came up to me in London and she said, I want to tell you about my near-death experience. So I said, great. And she said, what I saw was souls like sparks going up into the light and falling away. And that's a beautiful metaphor for what I'm describing. Because what I want to suggest is that what the love light is the communion of souls. What the love light is souls coming together like individual filaments to create this one light. That we rise up into and fall away from, and rise up into and fall away from. And through that process we are bringing it into existence. Because this process of evolution has been one of individuation and unividuation, jumping to a new level of unity. Hydrogen and oxygen did it a long time ago. And there was water. Single cells did it a long time ago. And there's now this one integral, united human body made up of all these cells. And it's impossible for that cell in my finger to know what it's like to be Tim. But without all of those cells, no Tim. In the same way, what I'm suggesting is that what we call God, transcendent being, like this is one body made of many cells, is the next level of unividuation. That we come together as individual cells in that state of awakening, in that state of love, and bring into existence something which transcends it. And Tim can't know what it's like to be God. But Tim does know exactly what it's like to commune as one in God. Because that feels like love. Yes. Magic is, I think, this is another big subject. I can't go into it too much. But one of the things I explore in Soul Story is that the level of imagination, of the collective dimension of soul, is interfacing with this all the time. That's what creates the story. So that experience, which I'm sure everyone here has had, of synchronicity, magic, the book you need to read falling on your head, the strange meetings, all of that stuff, the dream-like nature of reality, is because your experience of life is being created by the interaction of everything, all the levels of evolution. So on one level, it is cause and effect. Look, things fall, things fall, things fall. That's working on one level. On another level, it's biological. Look, it's going boop, 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 boop. Ooh. And on another level, it's story. So a bit like if you looked at a computer game and you're playing in story, you're playing the game, whatever it is, but on another level, it's an operating system. And on another level, it's ones and zeros. But they're all happening at the same time. And the purpose of the ones and zeros and the operating system is the story. So that the story of your life, rather than being, like science would portray it, as a relevant, unreal fantasy, I think is the whole purpose. The purpose of the evolution of the universe has been to get to the level where it becomes the story of you. And now it has become the story of you. That's where I wanted to get. That's got there. And now it's up to you to live the story of you. And maybe rather than diving into questions, maybe I'll just say this one other thing. Are you okay with that, or do you is that because it feels like it's so big? You need to have a look at the book. I described the name of the book. The subtitle is Evolution and the Purpose of Life. So let me end by just saying something about the purpose of life. Again, when I sat down to write it, I thought, isn't it funny that if you talk about the purpose or the meaning of life, it sounds like a joke. It's like a Monty Python gag. Because we've got to the point where it's like, well, life has no purpose, it just happened. I don't think that's right at all. Because I think purpose, like everything, has evolved. So the primal purpose of life is inherent in the nature of existence. What is existence? What is time? It's the realization of potential. And because of evolution, it's the realization of potential on ever more emergent levels. So what's the purpose of life? To realize the potential on ever more emergent levels. So that's going to happen physically for a while. It's just going to be through chance because there's no consciousness. And then it happens in biology, and it's going to be really about survival and how you can cleverly get one over the things you want to eat or avoid the things that want to eat you. And then it reaches soul, and then suddenly we have imagination. And we have the ability in that to go, okay, what is my purpose? What's the deepest purpose? What is the deep purpose of this existence? Is the deep purpose to get a good job and have a big house? Or is there a deeper purpose? And what I want to suggest is that it's evolving to that level. So that for you and I, our purpose is to realize our unique potentiality in the most emergent ways. That's what it is. And it's something you will take with you when you die. When you die, you'll take one thing with you. Everything you've ever been. That's what you take with you. Because that's what you are. And you can never lose it, ever. You'll take that with you, always. That's what you are. So every choice you make becomes what you are. You chose to come to this meeting. It's now what you are. That's part of you. Every choice you make will become the structure of your soul. Isn't that amazing? You have that ability to create yourself. So, my thought that I want to offer you here is the purpose of our lives on this level is soul formation. We are forming ourselves in the most emergent ways we choose to. And we can just go, or we can go, yeah. And I'll say this one other thing too, which is if you want to come and play with me doing that, if you want to treat yourself to some real soul formation, I run these events. Some of you have been to them. There's 2 people I'm looking at there who have. They're beautiful events in which we can share the deep awake state with each other. This thing, which I'm saying is the latest level of evolution, you can experience it for yourself. You will feel that presence of love. You will know that oneness. You'll find that deep being. I've got one in a couple of weeks, 12th to the 14th, and there's still a few places left. It's in Glastonbury. It's in a beautiful location overlooking the Abbey ruins in Glastonbury. It's a lovely house. It's not a big group. There'll be 30 of us, maybe a bit more. Not too many, enough that it's personal. And I promise you, your soul will have a delightful, delightful time. And we'll be able to look at what does this mean actually in our lives, not just as a philosophy, but actually as a way of living. And how can we actually wake up to that deep presence that we are, and then how can we engage with this incredible process, been going on for 13.8 billion years, with real love, authenticity, passion, feeling empowered, and able to do the most for ourselves and to give the most to the collective. And that's the reason I have come to Watkins all the way from Somerset. It's the reason I was in Northampton last night. It's the reason I go everywhere. It's just to say there is an opportunity to do this. Let's take it. Let's wake up. Let's really engage with this evolutionary process. That's the opportunity we have. So thank you all for turning out to listen to me speak. It's been such a pleasure because you've been such an attentive group of lovely souls. And if you do have a look at the books, I hope you really enjoy them. So, thank you.